Hi, welcome to the Body Smart Book Club, where we talk about the best of what we read. Today we're going over pages 156 to 189, so basically all of chapter 5. I'm Melody, this is Preston, here's
This is Mark.
And we're excited to go over this. It's kind of a hefty chapter, so hopefully we can break it down into simpler terms and make it interesting and not just like a lecture. But before we get going, Preston has a good story for us.
Yeah, so my story somewhat relates to the content that we're going to be covering today. It comes from back in college. I was training throughout the summer months. So we were in like our base building phase. And we were heading over to Buse Pond, which is a typical place where we go to do some intervals and things like that in the summertime. And so we were doing a tempo run or a threshold run. And so it was very pace specific. You didn't want to go faster than the prescribed pace. You want to go slower. There's this fine window between zones 3 and 4 that you're supposed to hit there to get maximum benefit. At the time, I was a pretty young runner. I had never looked into anything beyond like, running is all about trying to run as fast as you can. And in training, if you're able to train faster, you're going to be faster. I didn't understand that there's different, zones you have to train to get to becoming a better runner. And so we started this workout and I was feeling great. I was running with all my teammates and I just felt like the pace was too easy and I could go harder and harder. So I picked up the pace and essentially just started running on my own in front of this group that I was supposed to be training with. And it was going well and I was super pumped after. I was like, man, I just crushed this workout. I'm going to have such a great season coming up. I'm in really good shape. And I remember after we finished, we were sitting off to the side of the trail, changing our shoes from our flats just back into our trainers. And our coach came running over and he was, he looked really excited about what he'd seen. So he's like, nice job, guys. You all ran really well today. I'm really pumped about the effort you put in. Uh-huh. And then he turned towards me with this glare and was like, except for Preston. You are uncoachable.
Go stand in the corner.
And to me, I was just like, why? I just ran so well in this workout.
Yeah.
But, the more I've learned, the more I look back at that and I'm like, okay, it's important that I run this specific pace and I'm not out there racing these workouts. A threshold workout in particular is very dependent on your effort level, and you don't want to go beyond a certain point, but you also don't want to go too easy either. And so it was very humiliating for me at the time, but now I look back at it and my teammates and I always joke about that everyone vividly remembers, him just turning to me with a stern face and
well, you learned your lesson.
Yeah.
That's funny. I think every single runner will experience this or has experienced this. If you're an advanced athlete, you everyone has come from that place of racing every single run and pushing themselves too hard, right? I think it's just a lesson that we all have to learn.
Yeah, which is a difficult thing to get over. And as we've talked about before, this idea of kind of being the ultimate endurance athlete and that good feeling of passing people as you're running. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes for a lot of different sports, right? Whether you're cycling or even playing a team sport and you're like, man, I just trounced that guy. I sprinted so much faster than him. There's something just that competitive nature that we have built in that feels really good doing those things. But recognizing that speed is not always the purpose of any given workout. Mm-hmm. It's really looking at, okay, what are my goals? How am I designing my runs to meet those goals? And a lot of times it means slowing down, and slowing down is hard. I just, even from personal experience, right? It's, you're decked out in your run gear, I'm a pretty fit guy. And then just some grandma comes cruising by me and I'm just yep, and it's hard, right? To keep that pace. But really being able to focus on what matters most and being able to dial in those training goals so that we're getting the specific things out of the different runs that we're looking for really is going to be beneficial for our performance long term.
For sure. Depending on the mood I'm in, these are some things that help me when I'm running slow. If an old lady or if anyone passes me, in my head I'm like, they're probably in zone 3 right now.
I thought you were going to be like,
they're totally doing it wrong. I totally just trip on them.
Yeah, I know. That's why I thought you were like, and in my head I just push them off the trail and gently to the side.
Beat them up and keep running.
We've really been bashing on this hypothetical old lady.
Yes.
So,
I'm so sorry, old lady.
It doesn't mean necessarily, there's no stereotypes there.
Yes,
you
no
can
stereotypes.
be an old lady and also be fast. Like maybe the old lady who's passing you is totally in zone 1 and she's just more fit than you. And you just gotta
that's
accept
probably
it.
accurate.
So,
Let's be honest.
Yes.
Yeah.
but no shame. Love yourself as you are right now.
Getting out there running,
Okay.
that's the important part.
Exactly. Just get out and move.
More or less, that's what we're going to be talking about today is these different workouts, their intended purposes, where we use them within our training cycles, and lots of good stuff like that. So
It'll be good.
Let's dive in.
okay.
All right. Aerobic base development. Volume is the key.
Development. Did you like that? Nice play on words. Thank you. Thank you.
So we've touched on this a lot in this podcast. I feel like aerobic base development, it's all about your slow
All
intensive
about that
runs.
bass. All about that bass. No trouble.
So all
I'm on a thing today, apparently.
They just finished up in a 6-hour meeting, and so their
We're
brains are a
we're a
little
little
fried.
loopy
It's a
today.
little, it's a little slap
It's hard to pay attention.
But all about that bass, for real. Like
Base
it's
development.
it's super important. Yeah.
So volume is key. Okay, so your aerobic base development, this is all about being in your zone 1, zone 2, depending on where your zones are, right? So we talked about you're probably going to start in zone 2, but as you progress as an athlete, you want to get back and be training in zone 1. And this is where we want to be doing 80% of our training, lots of, low load, long runs.
Yeah. I mean, really, when we're looking at building an entire training program on that base,
Mm-hmm.
right, it really is the base of that pyramid. It has to support the rest of our goals, the rest of our training. And if that piece isn't there, that training plan is going to essentially topple over. And so it's essential that piece gets locked in. And it is like that volume is super important, getting out on a regular basis so that we're able to build those adaptations long term. And the nice thing, like you mentioned, right? Like it begins in zone 2 and it feels really like it's going to feel slow.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just kind of the fact, unless you're like unless you're pretty elite, like it's actually going to be pretty slow.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the nice thing, right? Is as we continue building that over time and we devote that portion of our schedule to building that, eventually we get faster and faster. And that's why it moves from zone 2 efforts, tapering down more to zone 1s as we become fitter, because those zone 2 efforts are just too close to our zone 3, right? We're just becoming so much fitter, so much faster that we have to slow down to allow our body to have time to recover from that training stimulus.
Yeah, I actually, I learned that when I was training for my 100-mile run, because I was keeping my heart rate around 140, which was my zone 2. And as I got better, 140 ended up being my zone 1. So I always thought, you're supposed to train in your zone 2. So when I found out that my 140 went into my zone 1 and my zone 2 is a lot higher, I was like, awesome. That means I can run at 160 beats per minute every single run. And I held that for a few weeks, totally burnt out. I came into the clinic and talked to our partner Cameron. I was like, what's going on? And he's the one who kind of explained, no, now you need to stay in your zone 1. Because even if those high heart rates are in your zone 2, that just is too high of a heart rate for you to maintain for a long time.
Yeah. The more time you end up spending in below this aerobic threshold, zone 1 and zone 2, essentially the faster you'll be able to run in those zones without reaching that zone 3. Zone 3 more or less begins to shrink, even to the amount of 15 beats per minute as far as your heart rate variability between zone 2 and getting to zone 4. So, I mean, that zone 3 really, because it gets pretty small the more you start to train that aerobic threshold. And that's the goal, especially if you're doing the longer, marathon, ultra marathons, half marathon, whatever it is. The longer or the more time in that race you can spend running your race pace below your aerobic threshold, is what's ultimately going to carry you through the race. If you start to cross over that line, that's when you're going to need to slow down. And so really the more you can shrink that zone 3, the higher you can push that aerobic threshold by doing more mileage in that aerobic threshold, the faster you can be able to run your race without overdoing it early on in the early stages.
Yeah. And the really nice thing about this phase of training too is, and it's really one of the big things that helps performance, is it's training our body to use fat effectively and efficiently as fuel so that we don't have to rely on those limited carbohydrate stores. And so we just have a larger range where we're using a more predominant amount of fat to fuel our runs. And that also makes it easier to recover from, and we're not having to constantly refuel. Even just very thin, well-endurance trained athletes still have a ton of calories, right? In the tens of thousands of calories versus about, as we talked about before, about 2,000 calories at any given time stored of carbohydrate on the body.
And just a reminder, I know we've said this before, but in your base building period, remember to start where you are. I highlighted this quote in the book. It says, base your expectations on the reality that your results will be directly proportional to the time you spend in preparation. And that wasn't the right quote. You guys are like, what? Okay, this is the quote. That was a good quote too. This quote: the important thing is to start from the right point and then progress, adapt, and in the process learn some valuable lessons. So start where you're at. Don't try to follow an elite athlete's training plan if you're not an elite athlete. Don't try to follow someone's training plan who is running way more miles than your body is ready to run. Just accept yourself as you are right now and start from where you are right now and learn some valuable lessons as you progress from where you're at.
Yeah. And that's the very next question the book essentially asks, is it says, so why not just do what the pros do? And I think Melody covered that really well, and the fact that you're not going to be able to absorb that training if you're doing what they do. They've been adapted over long periods of time, built up a certain level of a base to the fact that they can handle that workload. So always start out small and work up rather than bite off more than you can chew to begin with.
Yeah, really, there are no shortcuts to building yourself into an excellent endurance athlete. There's going to be articles that come out. There's books, right? Do this training plan or do this thing will help, and really when we stand it against the test of time and the test of training methods that actually work, those by and large fall by the wayside and they aren't effective long term. And so just, again, the idea that it takes commitment, it takes time to build those things. And like you mentioned, Preston, years. I mean, Killian has trained his entire life. Like his life has from like infancy basically has been built into becoming just like a superior endurance athlete and
a superior being.
Yeah. But those didn't come by accident, right? In some sense, he kind of won the genetic lottery, right? But also just building a lifetime of training upon that allows him to accomplish the truly amazing feats that he can. And so that understanding has to be there, right? The time that you put in is going to be proportional to the results that you get out.
Thanks for tying in that quote.
Yeah. Through this time he spends, training these zone 1, zone 2, aerobic threshold, building up your mitochondria density and your capillary density. It's good to check in every now and then as well and just kind of check your progress. If you're not seeing any gains, you're probably running too fast. One of the methods that it talks about in the book for how you can check this is doing these aerobic development tests, essentially where you have a set-aside route that you go do and you have a certain heart range you're trying to hit. And you stick around that heart rate range and compare your times over 2-week intervals. So every 2 weeks, go around this course. Doesn't even necessarily need to be hard. Just making sure that your heart rate is within the same range and comparing times back and forth. And that kind of show you, am I getting to a point where I can run a little bit faster within this aerobic threshold and be able to sustain that for a long period amount of time. Yeah, so to maximize that benefit that we're going to be getting from this training within the aerobic threshold, I kind of picked out 3 different words here that I really see as important to incorporate into our training and to use when looking at a training plan. And those words are specificity, individuality, and continuity. So these are 3 kind of words that speak to the goals of a good training program. So one, you want it to be specific. You want it to be adapted towards the type of race or event you're training for. And so, if that be a mountain race or a trail race, then, you're going to want to specific to running on the trails and running hills and making sure you're a very strong athlete as well. Individuality, making sure that it plays to the points within your own physiological self to use your strengths and weaknesses to try and balance those out. And so, for instance, if you see yourself as more of like a strength-based runner, play into those strengths. Make sure that you are using those to the fullest amount, and then be aware of the things that you aren't as good at so that you can try and compensate or try and make those things as good as you can to be able to supplement your strengths.
Yeah.
And continuity, the last one, kind of speaks for itself. Just the fact that the best training plan is one that you're able to sustain for a long period of time. If you're having to take a day off every 2 or 3 days because you're either over fatigued or you have an injury or something like that, you're not going to get the max benefit from your training.
For sure. No, I think that piece is huge, especially, right? Being able to build a training plan that you're able to stick to. Because ultimately it doesn't matter how amazingly detailed the training plan is and like how awesome, oh man, I've set the goals just perfect, right? If there's no follow through, then you don't get the benefit. On the individuality side of things, elocution, it just made me think of the athlete story from a couple weeks ago where he talked about wanting to be faster than the track athletes in college, right? Like, and he tried every year and he just never made it. And then when he kind of found his way into mountain running, he started like just killing it, right? Crushing those races. And he found that for his physiology, he was much better adapted to those races. And so that's not saying you should just be like, get off the track and go up in the mountains or vice versa, right? But I think it speaks to like what you said. I loved how you put that, exploring your strengths and maybe trying out different forms of running, right? Trying out trail running, trying out track running, trying out just different forms and different lengths, right? Anywhere from your 5K to your ultra marathon, right? And what works for you, what works for your schedule, what works in terms of how your body's able to recover, and just what ends up being really enjoyable to you. And I think having that mindset rather than I have to be this way can make the journey of discovering yourself as a runner a lot more enjoyable.
For sure. And I just want to add that individuality isn't just about like how you are genetically and if you genetically fit this kind of running. It's also your personality. A part of it could even be like what crowd do you feel most comfortable with, because the trail runners are a little bit different than the track runners. And also, what are you most passionate about? Maybe your body is more built for sprinting, but maybe you just really love to be in the mountains, and so that fits you better, and vice versa.
Yeah, I love that that last thing you said, just love to be in the mountains, or you love doing whatever it is within running, because I think that's ultimately the most important part, because you're not going to be motivated to get your training in if you're forcing yourself to do something you don't like doing.
Exactly.
Yes.
I'm not going to be a good, if I jump into a swimming program, I'm not going to be very consistent with my training, because
you'll have drowned.
Laps in a pool just aren't something that I can do very well. So, so try to find what you love and build your training towards that. So with these training plans, we get into more specifics of what a typical workout day should look like and what different things you would see before, during, and after a workout. So obviously the first thing that it goes into is your warm-up. And the importance of that.
Yeah, which I think is often neglected, right? We have this time period, especially when we're trying to manage our time, right? Yeah. Okay, this is my time period to run, and do I really need to warm up, right? Do I need to spend that time? But we need time to get our energy systems up and running, right? Especially our aerobic system up and running, right? It takes several minutes to do that. And we also want to just warm up our muscles, get the blood flowing. We run into the danger of, kind of going from 0 to 100 and nothing flat, that our body just isn't prepared necessarily to go there so quickly. And so that is where, potentially some injuries can occur, or at least it just gets us off on the wrong foot for going on the rest of the run.
Well, there's certain changes within your body that take place as well with that warm-up that are not only beneficial for, helping you get going in the workout, but probably having more of a positive experience with it as well.
Yeah.
Actually, when you start running, your capillaries start to dilate, so you can move blood faster. Your core temperature starts to rise, and your blood pressure adjusts accordingly so that it's able to maximize your movement of blood and oxygen throughout your body to fuel your muscles as they output the workload that you put on them. And so for missing out on those things, it could be, the first few intervals of our workout, the first half of the threshold run that we may not be maximizing because we are still kind of in that adjustment period of our body adapting to, oh wow, like we're working right now. I'm not sitting in school anymore. We're not in a meeting right now. So it's time to get going. And so your body does take a little bit of time to do that.
For sure. Well, just imagine going from sitting at a desk all day to standing up from that desk and then just like full on sprint as hard as you can. That is just a recipe for injury, right? Yeah, that just doesn't make sense. Another thing about warm-up is the higher the intensity your workout is going to be, the longer you're going to need to warm up. And there's a difference between warming up for a sprint and warming up for maybe like a long distance run. So a long distance run, you honestly can just kind of start running and you just start slow and just take your first like 10 to 20 minutes to just run slow and kind of warm up and then eventually pick up your speed. Versus if you're getting ready for a sprint workout, you're going to do that specific warm up, running around the track a few times to warm up before you jump into that workout.
Yeah, and note that like your heart rate as you begin to warm up as well is not going to be the same. It's not going to be a 1-to-1 comparison of the pace and heart rate. So obviously, like if you're warm up, you're running 7-minute pace, it's going to be a shock to your body. Your heart rate might be higher than it typically would be if you're running that same pace later on in the run. And so using that to help gauge your workouts and not necessarily taking individual data points and using those as your zones. As opposed to keeping an eye on it throughout the run and the way that your body's reacting to it, and using that is more of an indicator for how you should be doing your workouts. And it even talks about that in regards to the warm-up. Having this longer warm-up, especially for some of these longer workouts, is important because you can start to gauge how your body's going to feel that day. Is it really going to be a good day to go do a hard effort? Maybe today just needs to be that recovery day and you put your speed workout off to another day. It's not going to have as much benefit to you if you go do this workout and your body is already depleted or you're not able to run it as fast as you normally would a different day. By all means, like you got to check yourself at the door and make sure that, am I saying this because I'm feeling lazy today, or am I doing this because this is the smart decision to move forward with my workout? But being fluid with your training and using your warm-up as kind of a gauge for that is good advice that it has in there.
Yeah, for sure. Don't do the workout if your body's not going to absorb the workout. Another thing that we learn in the book is cool down. So we have our warm up, then we have our cool down afterwards. A big part of the cool down is just to tell your body and your mind that we're done. We're just going to slowly ramp things down. It's kind of opposite. I talked about sitting at a desk, getting up, and then sprinting. Imagine just like sprinting as hard as you can, and then you just stop and sit. Like that's just going to mess with you. It's nice to have that just slow cool down, let your heart rate come down, let the sweating stop, let your brain kind of get back to real life before you just stop.
Yeah. One of the things, Preston, you talked about how part of the warm up, right, is for those capillaries to dilate. And so if we're going directly from a workout to sitting down, you still have that capillary dilation. And so you go from there to sitting, you have some of that kind of venous pooling in your lower extremities, right, where the big muscles have been working. And so you can get things like dizziness, lightheadedness, especially then if, you sat down and then you all of a sudden get up again, right? Like that happens all the time, right? People get lightheaded, almost faint, sometimes actually pass out, right? So just, again, kind of along the idea of let's give our body time to readjust and get back to that, closer to that resting level, instead of just a bam, 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 right? Bam on, bam off, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a shock, that's for sure.
Yeah.
One thing that really stood out to me was the duration in which they want you doing your cool down, especially for those more intense workouts. So it said for the low intensity workouts, sometimes it might not warrant as much of a cool down because you're kind of phasing out of that workout by in the end of your run. But for these high intensity workouts, they recommended almost 20 to 30 minutes of cooling down in zone 1. So in my mind, I don't think that means exclusively running. I think there's other things you can be doing. You don't need to go for a 30-minute run afterwards, but maybe you go for a 15-minute run and then you do some dynamic stretches and maybe some recovery techniques that might count as that cool down to go towards that 20 to 30 minutes.
You need to mow your lawn or something like that.
Yeah.
Just use one of the self-propelled ones, the push mower.
That's a workout.
A little too intense.
Too high.
Just get your scissors out and.
Yeah. Except I think that would raise your heart rate just with the anxiety of trying to cut your
Yes. Accurate. Okay. But I like the idea of with any of this stuff is just keeping it simple, right? You don't need this complex, this is how I have to warm up and I have to have step 1 and step 2 and step 50, right? And same thing with cool down, right? You can build other things into it, right? You can, maybe it's just you go home and you take your dog on a light walk, or you do some things around the house, but just kind of that active movement that allows your body to kind of return to baseline. And so it doesn't have to be this super structured thing. It can be a lot more free-spirited.
For sure. And that kind of moves us into recovery workouts. Listen to the last episode if you want to hear more about recovery.
Yeah.
Was it the last episode or was the episode before that? Anyways, a previous episode.
Yes. We're always talking about recovery. That's always a topic. Yeah.
But, after you cool down, make sure that you don't go home and sit for the rest of the day. Make sure you keep moving. Like you said, mow the lawn, clean your house, just kind of keep moving so you keep your muscles fresh and allow your body
learn to tap
recover.
dance.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Don't do that.
Or break dance. I would rather learn
that
break dance.
That would be more fun. Yeah. So let's get into the idea of pickups. Not pickup lines, as we had previously discussed. Although Melody did have a good one.
Are you from Tennessee? Because you're the only 10 I see.
Essentially, we're going to be talking more about the bread and butter of our training, and Mark is still dying over there.
So we're going to get more into the different kind of workouts. So we have our warm-ups, our cool-downs. Now this is what we do in between that.
Yeah. So a pickup is more or less, kind of says it in the name. We're just going to be picking up the pace for a short amount of time in the middle of a run. So you might be out, and for me, is a fun way to kind of mix up what you're doing out there on the run as well.
Yeah, I like these.
And you don't need to do these necessarily all the time. It said they did it maybe once a week, something like that. Just something to give you a little bit of a change of pace and get your legs moving a little bit faster.
Pick me up, if you will.
Yes.
FYI, this is in the base phase. So this is how you can get a little bit of high intensity in the base phase if you're getting really bored of your slow long runs.
Yeah, and these aren't very long. They're just going to be, a couple seconds, 6 to 8 of them in a run. What did it have? Between 10 and 20 seconds, something like that.
Yeah.
8 to 15 seconds. So 8 to 10 seconds in the beginning. Once you get a little bit better, up to 15 to 20 seconds.
Yeah. And when you're first starting, it doesn't necessarily need to be an all-out sprint. It's more of just picking up the pace as if you were going race pace or something like that. It doesn't need to be, you take off in a dead sprint in the middle of your run.
So this is more of a zone 3. So just a fast, fun pace.
Yeah.
And you can either do these, you can spread them out throughout your workout. If you do them in the beginning of your workout, it's more of a get you energized, get you pumped. If you do it towards the end of your workout, it's more of a asking your legs to push harder when they're fatigued, kind of fatigue resistance in there.
So the next type of workout that it mentions in the book are these tempo workouts, and this is going to be more of your aerobic threshold, zone 2, maybe zone 3, a little bit in there as well. So these are going to be runs that are going to be 20 minutes or longer. 20 up to about 60 minutes is what it listed in the book. And it is going to be training that's almost like a race pace for a marathon that you're looking at. And so you should never feel like you're going to the well with these. You should always be able to still be able to talk, but not necessarily like big, long, like paragraphs, rambling on about something.
Yeah. Well, I think the important part with these is that we're kind of getting to that steady state heart rate. So the heart rate isn't going boom, 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 right? We're keeping that tempo so that it's not jumping around wildly.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the workout that I was talking about earlier with my story. These ones are all about just staying on pace and keeping it consistent. The other aerobic workout that gets into here, talking about potential workouts you can do within your base building phase, is that progressive distance workout. And this is going to be a workout where essentially throughout your run, you are going to be picking up the pace as you go, and going all the way from zone 1, zone 2, up to zone 3, and even a little bit of zone 4 towards the end of it, for those that are more experienced and have been doing this for a little while.
So next, what the book goes over is kind of really dives into specific high-intensity training strategies that are working us from zones 3 all the way up to zone 5, and the different things that those are going to accomplish. And so for the purposes of being able to really treat that subject well and dive into it, we've decided to make a separate podcast for that, because even though it's only speaking to high intensity, there's a lot packed in there, and I think that there's some really good things that warrant a deeper dive into those, and kind of the how and the why of doing those things so that we can get the most benefit out of those. So at this point, I think let's go into some of the questions that we have. So we had a question about what happens when I've signed up for a race and I only have 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks, and hadn't really kind of thought about all the training that went into it. I was just like, excited, friend signed up, wanted me to sign up as well. And so kind of that situation, and how do we, how does one handle that in terms of getting the training in for something like that?
So I have a funny story before we dive into this question. I did an aid station for a marathon a few years ago, and it was super fun to watch everyone who went through. They were, really old people who were going through, and one guy was like his 70th marathon or something. Wow. And it was awesome, and it was really fun watching the first few marathoners go by. Mm-hmm. They're like way ahead of everyone else, and then at the very end there's these 2 teenage boys. They're probably like 17, 18 years old, and I was about in the middle, about mile 13ish, and they're just dying. They're not even running anymore. They're like walking, and they're huffing and puffing, and I was talking to them, and I was like, how long did you train? And they're like, oh man, like I didn't train for this at all. I just want to prove to myself I could run a marathon. And so here's the thing, depending on your determination and your mental toughness, I personally believe that if you have the mental toughness, anyone, like whoever I'm talking to right now, you can go run a marathon right now. The reason we train for a marathon or any race, you look like you don't believe me.
No. It's possible. I think it's speaking to the next point that you're going to make.
Mm-hmm. So the reason we train is so the marathon or whatever race you're doing, so you can do it faster, and so it's more fun, and so it's less painful. So the thing is, if you haven't built a base and you're going to try to run a marathon in 8 weeks, you just need to accept now that it probably is going to be slightly painful. You're not going to finish it really, really fast, and it's going to take a long time to recover. And if you're okay with those things, then honestly, just do the best you can in these 8 weeks you have and go run your marathon. But you just need to accept that you're going to be a little broken afterwards, and it's going to be kind of painful. So if you want to do that, cool. If you are not up for that, then maybe sell your ticket and, give yourself a little bit more time to do one a little further down the road.
Yeah, I think that would be best case scenario, probably looking into something else. Because with training, obviously, it's all about that continuity that we talked about earlier. And so if you all of a sudden dive headfirst into this training and get injured by running this race later on, you're just setting yourself back even further. If you are, that person, I'm doing this no matter what, I think we got to look at the ratio between the different types of training and which one is most applicable to that race. And so like every race, obviously every distance you're always using at least a small portion of every energy system. And so training the one that's going to be the biggest influence is going to be probably your best bet. And so the sake of, we've been talking about the marathon, obviously that's going to be your aerobic work, your base building stuff, to the point that Mark was talking about earlier as well. Without that base, you can't build that other stuff on top of it. And so specificity, just get out there and start running. Start out small still. Don't feel like you have to jump straight into this, and at least start making a little bit of progress towards that goal.
Definitely. But just like really have a conversation with yourself, like both of you spoke to. Is this really worth it? It's definitely something that's doable, but it depends on how much you want to suffer through it, honestly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you made a really good point, right? That risk for injury. We've talked so much about how the body responds to the demands placed upon it over time. And if we don't have sufficient time for the body to adapt, then it cannot bear the loads that it cannot bear certain loads that are placed upon it. And so again, if we haven't put in the time and effort to get that volume of training up, then our body it will not be adapted to those demands. And so it's gonna show up in some way, right? Whether that's an actual injury, whether it's fatigue for several days or weeks after. Four teeth. It's 4 teeth. Your teeth will be whether it's fatigue for several days or for several weeks afterwards, and potentially, like Preston said, setting you back weeks to months if your goal is to continue running or to maybe get a personal best at an upcoming marathon or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And if you're listening to this podcast / watching this podcast right now and you're like, crap, I signed up for a marathon, I only have 6 weeks to train, and I probably should do this. Another option is maybe the same race offers a half marathon or a 5K, and maybe you can just back it off and do one of the shorter distances.
I think everyone gets stuck in this false narrative that the longer the race, the more prestigious it is. Yeah. But even obviously, like, you'll see the top distance runners in the world opting to run the 5K versus the marathon. The same thing. It's all about the amount of work that you put into it and the effort level you put into that race that makes it incredible. And so just because you're forcing yourself to run a marathon, it's not any less impressive than you taking that training in that 6 weeks that you do have and using that to prepare for a shorter race, that you'd be able to have a more self-fulfilling result from that effort.
For sure. Yeah. And if you're one of those people who has a really hard time, if you're a runner, you probably are one of those people who has a hard time swallowing your pride and backing off a little bit. That's a feat in itself, in just choosing to back off a little bit.
Yeah. And man, I really love the way that you said, like, it's not the distance that makes it incredible, it's the effort you put in. Like, that's wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
should
I
be
love
on a
that.
T-shirt.
No, great stuff. So I think that wraps everything up. Melody, do you want to lead us off with our sponsors?
Sure thing. So, shout out to the Oakwood to Stansbury Trail Series by Jimmy Thomas. Shout out to the Utah Running Shop. Shout out to the Facebook page Run for Fun. Shout out to the Wasatch Run Club.
I knew that was going on the list over there. They even have mine listed further up, and she skipped over it. So I was like, oh, it's going to be the last one.
You started laughing, so I was I got to make this really big.
Yes, Wasatch Run Club. Check us out on Facebook and our website, www.wasatchrunclub.com. Got a lot of great resources for you. Free coaching advice, group runs, anything you'd ever want.
Everything.
Yep. All for free.
Make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. If you have any questions on this podcast / vodcast, or if you have any questions from the reading, go ahead and comment below. Send us a message on our Facebook page, Body Smart PT, or check out our website, bodysmartutah.com, and we'll catch you guys next Monday.
Always. Okay. Pickup lines.